tonight's event coincides obviously with the May Day weekend. But on this occasion, what we're doing is we're offering a distinctly internationalist view and a progressive internationalist view. And that will be articulated by speakers from Germany, the United States, Palestine, Canada, and our good friends and neighbors in Scotland. Each speaker will have 10 minutes. And so without further ado, it's time to introduce our first guest up, and his name is Florian Wilder. He is a historian, socialist activist working in the Berlin Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung Foundation, which is one of 6 major political foundations in Germany. It's tasked primarily with coordinating political education at home in Germany and also abroad. And it also, with an eye to the younger generation, provides funding at undergraduate and doctoral level to young scholars. And with that, I think I now ask Florian, if not to take the floor, at least to take the screen. Florian.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the presentation and inviting me to this exciting event and giving me the opportunity to draw some possible conclusions from the German unification for the so much desired unity of Ireland. I think that in many aspects, Germany should serve as a model of how not to do a unification. Because as you all know, in the fall of 1989, a mass popular movement erupted in the eastern part of Germany, which was the GDR, the German Democratic Republic. And people were demanding a reform of their state socialism towards a more democratic kind of socialism. So people went to the streets. The main slogan was, "We are the people," and folks were singing the International. But as soon as the GDR went into crisis under the pressure of this movement, the Western German capital started a huge propaganda offensive trying to convince people that all they need is a national unity. They were trying to convince them that with national unity, they would get all the liberties we have in the West, like traveling around, and they would get all our benefits and products that we have, like the bananas, which was a big issue those days, as in the East they didn't have bananas, in the West we had. So the Western capital was showing our bananas and saying, folks, just join us, let's create a united Germany, and you will have everything you have been asking for. And this intervention turned out to be very successful, because within a very few weeks, the central slogan of the movement in the East changed from "we are the people" towards "we are one people." And folks stopped singing the International and started singing the German national anthem. And so within a year, the national unification of Germany has been achieved. But it was not done in a way unification should be done. Unification should be done in the way of taking the best elements out of both sides and combine them to create something new and better for everyone. This is the way how unification should look like. But instead, what we've had in Germany, what was called unification, in the end was an annexation. In the end, it was just the eastern part joining the West, or even more concretely, the weaker East has been eaten up by the much stronger capitalist West. But this way of national unity led us straight away into new divisions and tensions among our people. Because in the minute of unification, the Western German capital started invading the East, buying off all those former state-owned companies for like 1 Deutschmark per factory, incredibly cheap prices. They were buying off everything, all the industries of the eastern part. They were flooding the eastern market with Western products and just destroying all possible competitors there. This led to an unprecedented deindustrialization of Eastern Germany. In the beginning of the 80s, Eastern Germany was counted among the 10 most powerful industrial countries of the whole world. But afterwards, after unification, hardly any industry was left. German capital seized the opportunity to create its own Mezzogiorno, You know, Mezzogiorno is a term they use in Italy for the backward south, which has served as a low-wage sector for northern Italian capital for decades. So the German capital tried to do the same thing. They tried to create their own Mezzogiorno, obviously not in the south, but in the eastern part of Germany. And this is like it has lasted until today. Even nowadays, workers in Eastern Germany are getting lower wages than their colleagues in the West. Workers in Eastern Germany have to work more hours than their colleagues in the West. Unemployment and poverty is much higher in the East, whereas the pensions are much lower. Me, for example, I'm working for the Luxemburg Stiftung, which is located in the former eastern part of Berlin, but literally just a few meters away from what has been the former West. But those few meters in between mean that even until nowadays, I need to work longer than people that work in the western part of Berlin. Our strongest union, the IG Metall, took up the fight for equal wages and equal working hours in 2003 with a big strike, but they lost the strike movement. So right now in these days, the IG Metall is struggling once again to force capital to pay the workers in the East the same money as in the West and to give us the same working hours. With Angela Merkel, as you know, we now have a prime minister coming from the East, and it's good that she's from the East. It's good that she's a woman, although nevertheless, she's a neoliberal enemy of the working classes. But if you look just under the positions beneath her, like all the leading positions in the national state apparatus are in the hand of people from the West. Whereas if you look to the eastern part, nearly all leading positions in the state apparatus are in the hand as well of Westerners. So the German unification has created new divisions that have lasted already for 30 years and new tensions among our people, because people from the West now tend to see those from the East as a threat to their wages and as a threat to their standard of living, whereas the people from the East see the Westerners as some kind of colonialist. And there's a popular saying in Eastern Germany that goes like, if you meet a Western German guy, it's either your boss or it's your landlord. But the German unification has also created divisions and tensions in another way, because in the early 90s, when people in the East finally realized how much German capital has been bullshitting with them, they went to the streets again, trying to do a new revolution. And in this moment, the Western German capital and the German government, the conservative government, started a massive scapegoating campaign trying to blame those refugees from the Balkans, from Turkey, from Afghanistan or whatever, as being responsible for the low wages and the bad economic situation. And this has been quite successful, breaking the movement that has been erupting there and leading to a situation where even till nowadays, the fascist right is its strongest in Germany in the eastern part. When in 2005, our then Social Democratic and Green Party-led government started the most brutal neoliberal attacks of German history, attacking so hard the unemployed people, there erupted a new movement, especially in the eastern part of Germany, where the unemployment was highest. And out of this movement, a new left party in Germany was born. This movement led finally to a left breakaway from the Social Democratic Party and to unification of left-wing forces from the East and from the West to a new German-wide united left party, which is my party, Die Linke. So this could be seen as a moment of a step towards a real unity achieved from below. But the general picture of the German unification is like kind of opposite. So to conclude, what could possible lessons for our Irish comrades be from the German unification process? I would argue that, like, first of all, if you do unification, you need to do a real unification, not just one part joining the other. Real unity would mean trying to bring the best parts of both sides together to create something new and better for everyone. Secondly, I would argue that in a real unification, the weaker parts always needs a special protection. It's workers, it's workplaces, it's industry, it's small business. They need a special protection against the stronger parts. And one needs to value the experiences and histories of both populations. Thirdly, I would argue that a real unity requires a unification process, not under the guidance of capital, but of the trade union movement and of the working class. To avoid a unification that will only lead to new tensions and divisions like the one we've seen in Germany. So therefore, I would argue, as this all seems quite impossible under capitalist conditions, the struggle for national unity should throughout the whole process be connected with the struggle for a democratic socialism. So in this sense, socialist May Day greetings to our friends, comrades, and colleagues in Ireland. Long live the struggle for a united and socialist Ireland. All power to the working class. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Florian, for that very informative and very inspiring deliberation there. And even better, you stuck within the time limits, which is a big plus as far as this May Day celebration is concerned. So thank you very much, Florian. Our next speaker up is Colleen Boyle. She's an organizer and researcher with the Labourers International Union of North America, LIUNA, which has over 500,000 members in both the US and Canada. Over the last 15 years, she's worked in a number of US trade unions, and principal among those that perhaps some of us would know would be the Service Employees International Union, SEIU. Colleen, you have the screen, if not the floor.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you to the organizers of this event for inviting me to participate. This is a really exciting conversation to be part of. And I mean, I would love to hear more from Florian already, and I'm sure that'll be true of everyone else who's speaking today. So I'm going to start with a little history because Irish Americans and the American labor movement have long supported first Irish independence and then the end of partition and a united Ireland. And I think it's useful to look back at some of the history of why that's true. So from about the 1830s to the 1920s, roughly 4 million Irish immigrants came to the United States. And since the 1920s, numbers are lower, but there's still people coming either permanently or temporarily. So because that immigration continued over such a long period of time, the connection to Ireland for families and communities remained really strong and an important part of Irish American identity. And also, the reasons that people were leaving Ireland didn't go away over time. Right? Irish immigrants left behind discrimination and exploitation, poverty and hunger, or in recently the always eloquent words of US President Joe Biden, they left because of what the Brits were doing. And that's remained something that people are very attached to in the US. And that desire for Irish freedom was and remains part of Irish American identity today. And then once in the United States, Irish immigrants found work, but they also found the same discrimination and exploitation within the American capitalist system. So first and second generation Irish were a huge component of the US working class that founded the labor movement here. Irish men and women were critical organizers for many US unions that were founded in the 1800s and early 1900s. In the early 1900s, about half of the unions that were in the American Federation of Labor had Irish-born or Irish-American leadership. And then, of course, key Irish organizers like James Connolly and Jim Larkin spent time doing labor organizing in America as well, and were key players in some of the unions here. So, the Irish in Ireland and America were and still are fighting for the same things: civil and political rights, economic freedom, and the power of self-determination. And those are the same things the labor movement as a whole is fighting for. So the connection between Irish America and Ireland has always existed with the need to fight for a better world. With the influence of Irish American members and organizers and leaders, unions in the US have supported movements for Irish independence and for a united Ireland, including providing some critical organizing for US political support during the Clinton presidency that helped with the Good Friday Agreement negotiations, or leading to the Good Friday Agreement. You know, that history of US labor union organizing specifically, that could take up probably an entire event of its own. But Irish unity would be an achievement that US unions have really been supporting for a century. I also spent some time thinking about what experiences American unions may have had that would provide like any insight for a united Ireland after the end of partition. I think that there are some lessons that can be taken from the US civil rights movement. As the Trade Unionists for a New and United Ireland document laid out, the end of partition doesn't automatically mean the success of a progressive agenda, right? And in the United States, in the 1960s, the passage of legislation that outlawed segregation and discrimination on the basis of race was a monumental change in society that came about after decades of organizing, but that didn't automatically translate to economic equality. And significant racial inequality still remains today in the United States. One of the most significant factors in actually increasing equality has been unionization, though. So achieving political goals is only one step of the whole process. And unions can be a major voice in pushing for that progressive vision of the future and actually organizing to make it happen. So I should talk about President Biden. So President Biden has laid out an aggressive domestic agenda, and it's aggressively pro-union agenda. He's maybe the most pro-union, or he's maybe laid out the most pro-union agenda of any US president ever. And included in that is kind of a side note is appointing his Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, who I'm proud to say comes from my union and is also the son of Irish immigrants. So on Ireland, Biden has already made clear his commitment to the Good Friday Agreement. And so now we're getting into a little bit more conjecture on my part about where he's at. I think Biden probably understands the history of Ireland and the history of partition better than any previous US president. On a personal level, he wanted to be and tried to be president for a long time. And contrary to a lot of what he said when running for president, I kind of describe his position now as go big or go home. I think he wants to make a big mark on history and be remembered as a great president. And unless there's kind of a huge unexpected change, his domestic agenda is going to be hampered by our dysfunctional Congress and political system. So I think United Ireland would be the type of singular achievement that he wants to have. Saying that, I wouldn't expect that President Biden would on his own would kind of just, say, call for a border poll. But I think if there's a movement in Ireland really calling for it and a movement within the Irish American community calling for a border poll, he would throw his weight behind it in a way that I think could make a difference. So that's the organizing challenge for us in the United States and in Ireland. And, that's up to us to take that on. But that's probably a whole separate conversation. So again, thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to see whatever else says, and I'll throw it back to Mick.
Thank you very much, Colleen. And you covered an awful lot of ground in a very short time. And I think you've left us a few things to chew on. I'm interested, obviously, in the link that you made between civil rights and economic rights, because behind me on the wall, just before that rather fancy Cuban poster, is a photograph of the March on Washington. And I always look at it and I say, well, if I was a nice liberal, I would see human freedom. But if, from my standpoint, I count all the placards which are calling for jobs, and that link between civil rights, the very point that you're making. Thank you very much, Colleen. Our next speaker is also from North America, Claire DeLille. I think I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Claire, has been a trade union activist since the 1980s, and she's currently a research and communications specialist with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, as it's known in Anglophone Canada, or le Syndicat des Travailleurs et Travailleuses de Poste, which is known in Francophone Canada. And just to show that there is, as we all know, that bouncing out of culture and language in Canada, which points the way, I suppose, not dissimilar from one of the points that Froning was making about respecting histories and so on. Her doctoral research was in the development of leadership in the years leading up to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and of which she has been a consistent international supporter. She also coordinates the James Connolly Irish Canadian Coalition and sits on the board of Friends of Sinn Féin Canada. So, Claire, you have the floor.
Claire, you're muted.
Let me start again. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you, Mick, and thank you to the trade unionists for New and United Ireland for inviting us. I'm very pleased to be here. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from unceded and unsurrendered Anishinaabe territory, which is more commonly known as Ottawa. And I want to pay tribute to Indigenous peoples everywhere on Turtle Island for their ongoing resistance to colonialism and for their wise relationship to the land. It's incumbent upon us all to dismantle colonialism throughout the world. It's something that the Irish know only too well. I'd like to give a shout out to my fellow speakers, to other trade union comrades like Layuna, for instance, who does fabulous support work for this, the steel workers, in particular Carolyn Egan, the Conseil Central du Montréal Métropolitain, the Public Service Alliance of Canada, and others that I'm surely forgetting. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers represents 56,000 workers from coast to coast to coast. Many of its workers are letter carriers, rural and suburban mail carriers, postal clerks, dispatchers, technicians, electricians. CUPW also represents cleaners and food couriers and drivers and vehicle mechanics and printers and emergency dispatchers in the private sector as well. We have the advantage of seeing the power of Canada and Quebec's largest logistics network at work. We see the potential of our own country. We know that collectively our voices can push for change. We are at an important juncture. Given the state of our world with a yet unresolved pandemic, a climate emergency, a stubbornly persistent neoliberal agenda that results in ever-increasing inequality, as workers, we're in a position to influence needed change. The key priority at CUPW at the moment is keeping workers safe. We also have a major campaign called Delivering Community Power that aims to influence our publicly owned Canada Post to make a green turn and provide new and needed services. The core demands for this campaign include transitioning the largest public fleet of vehicles to electric energy and retrofitting buildings. The union is calling for the establishment of postal banking and other services like looking in on seniors to ensure their safety and well-being. Our Delivering Community Power campaign aims to put in place the necessary elements that can take care of all Canadians, reaching the people and the communities who have been left behind and who are paying the price for corporate abandon. This is how, in part, a just recovery can take place. The future of the world post-COVID will depend on us looking out for each other. As you know, an injury to one is an injury to all, so we must continue to fight for each other's well-being and safety at work, at home, and in our communities. Let's be at the forefront of insisting that positive change and new alternatives to the status quo be implemented. Workers everywhere face the same problems to various degrees. Neoliberalism has wreaked havoc on all our societies. It's time that workers unite and call for a just recovery with publicly owned, accessible public services, social programs, and an end to extreme wealth. CUPW supports workers at home and worker struggles elsewhere. This brings us to Irish unity. A call and petition aimed at getting the Irish and British governments to hold referenda north and south on Irish unity was launched in 2020. CUPW signed on to this, along with the Quebec-based Conseil Central du Montréal Métropolitain that represents 100,000 workers, Hassan Youssouf of the Canadian Labour Congress, who represents 3 million members, the former president of the Ontario Federation of Labour, Sid Ryan, as well as Charlie Angus and Alexandre Boulris of the Federal New Democratic Party. In 2019, CUPW joined LAUNA on a trade union delegation to open the James Connolly Visitor Center in Belfast. CUPW has maintained contact with the JCVC and looks forward to future collaboration with the Center for our union education program. In Montreal, the Conseil Central du Montréal Métropolitain, part of the Confédération des syndicats nationaux and my former union, has Ireland as an issue in its International Solidarity Committee and has been involved since 1980. They are active in promoting the full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement and the United Ireland campaign. We also have the James Connolly Irish Canadian Labour Coalition, through which we try and keep members and unions informed on the latest news regarding Brexit, the threat to the Good Friday Agreement, and the campaign for a united Ireland. We participate to the extent possible in events held here and now held virtually. As for the broader Canadian picture, there are international supporters promoting a united Ireland in many major cities, including Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. There's been a dedicated group of activists on the ground in these and other places for years. They've worked tirelessly to champion the peace process, to raise awareness of the deleterious effects of Brexit, and to promote the call for referenda to be held north and south on unity. Canada's role during the peace process should not be overlooked on more official fronts. Besides the work done by General de Chasteling of the Decommissioning Commission, who I'm sure everybody knows of, other individuals played key roles. Justices Corey and Hoyt were both on the Bloody Sunday inquiry. Professor Clifford Shearing took part in the Police Reform Commission. The Honorable Warren Allman, the former Solicitor General of Canada, was also a key supporter of the peace process and participated in various missions to Ireland, along with folks like Pierre Paquette and Gilles Duceppe of the Bloc Québécois. Canadian policy is to support the full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement with the full support of all parties, and a unity referendum is part of that agreement. As you're probably aware, Canada's had what's euphemistically referred to as a constitutional crisis. In the past, there have been 2 attempts on the part of Quebec to secede from Canada by way of referendum. By and large, trade unions have been open to the right of self-determination of Quebec. CUPW's national policies include an article that says that the union supports the right of Quebecers to self-determination and the adoption of French as the official working language of Quebec. The Canadian Union of Public Employees has similar language on this issue. The Canadian Labour Congress created a partnership with the FTQ, which is the Quebec Federation of Labour, and not what it means in Ireland, with a view to transcending their own constitutional impasses. In Quebec, some unions played an active part in the campaigns for independence. I will not deny that this was a very divisive subject, but when workers are engaged in a class analysis of the issues, it becomes obvious that such troubles are often encouraged by an establishment with a divide and conquer agenda. This never bodes well for the working class. It's important for progressive labor organizations to keep their eye on the ball and steer workers towards struggle that lead to better conditions. It's important to note that there's a difference in context between Canada and Anglo-Irish relations. Quebec is part of Canada when it was trying to leave, whereas in Ireland, it's a question of reuniting 2 parts of the island. Regardless of the context, what's important to emphasize is the need to ensure that constitutional arrangements take into account the rights of workers with parity of esteem for all communities living within its borders. Here, for instance, Indigenous peoples have still not to this day arrived at a just place in colonial Canada. The number of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is shameful. Many Indigenous communities are to this day without potable water or the necessary resources to lead a decent life. And the transgenerational trauma created by the abuse suffered at the hands of Canadian authorities and the churches is another legacy of colonialism. And this is to say nothing of our own anti-Black racism. Once again, it's the role of progressive labor organizations to wage struggle on these fronts to help dismantle ongoing colonial harm. Equally important, therefore, is to advance human rights by putting an end to racism, dismantling patriarchy, and fighting capitalism and neoliberalism. Irish workers, North and South, of whatever community, deserve to have a government that is geared toward people before profit. And it's part of CUPW's mandate to support workers' struggle in other countries. International solidarity is a very important part of the mission. Lastly, we should note that labor unions, while representing unionized workers, can also be a voice for the unorganized, for gig workers, for the unemployed, for workers who are students, for workers who are at home taking care of families. The mission is to carve out a just place and way of life for the 99%, a place where people have all the needed resources to live decent lives. CUPW lends its solidarity and support to workers in a struggle to create a new Ireland that places its people at the center of its priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Again, a very thoughtful and wide-ranging presentation. And I like particularly the remarks that you made pointing out the position of the Indigenous people or First Canadians, and also your remarks at the end about the role of the trade union movement as being the voice also for those who are at present unorganized, particularly in the gig economy and working at home. And no doubt one or two other speakers may come back to that. Our next speaker up is Jamal Juma. He was born in Jerusalem, attended Birzeit University, where he became politically active. Since the first Intifada, he has focused on grassroots activism, and in 2002 became the coordinator of the Palestinian Grassroots Anti-Apartheid Wall Campaign. Then in 2012, he became coordinator of the Land Defense Coalition, which is a network of Palestinian grassroots movements. He's spoken at numerous civil society and UN conferences addressing the issue of Palestine and the apartheid wall, and his articles are disseminated and translated in several languages. My pleasure now to welcome Jamal to take the screen. Thank you, Jamal.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much for this very interesting conference, and thanks for the trade unionists for the new and united Ireland. It is a really great idea. Just before we start, let me give a very quick current situation in Palestine. Other than the COVID-19, we are under, since the beginning of the year, we are under really huge attack from the Israeli forces, military, and the state on our people. And this is mainly to accelerate the annexation plan of the West Bank, paving the way for the apartheid system and colonial apartheid system that they are creating since the beginning, I would say just in 67, but as well in the beginning of occupying Palestine in 48. The attacks nowadays, it's on the different fronts. First of all, the Jordan Valley, which is, and the Area C, which is around 60% of the West Bank. Since the beginning of this year, they start massively attacking the Bedouin communities for evacuating them from that area. This is in a way to free that area from the Palestinians to be able to annex it. Humsa was a very good example. Maybe many of you have been followed what happened in Humsa. Humsa is a Bedouin community, big Bedouin community in the north of the Jordan Valley, which they destroyed in late January, February, until now for 7th time, and the people is still standing there, steadfastly there. They are until now considering the area, military zone. They are banning the people from connecting with the other Palestinian villages. We have so many confrontations in the place there. They even lately, they start like banning them from any humanitarian aid that come there. Even the water, you can't imagine that they are smuggling the water to their places. It's not just Hamsa, but also several other places that they are attacking in different ways, either when they have military exercises in the middle of the Palestinian communities, or destroying also houses or tents and shelters here and there. The other huge attack is on Jerusalem. Jerusalem have been, since the beginning of the year, declared many neighborhoods where they're supposed today to destroy, but they postpone it until Thursday. There's a lot of solidarity with the soldiers, not soldiers, but even the settlers who's coming to the place there, attacking the people, staying even a whole night, just like making the situation is very tension there. The other one is Silwan. Silwan, there's 3 neighborhoods that with 3,000 people living in, that they also threaten to be evacuation. Hayy al-Bustan, Wadi Hilwa, Wadi Yasul, so many places, this huge attack going on there. The other thing is the settlers' attacks and the outposts that they are creating almost every month and every week in several places, particularly targeting the Bedouin communities in the Jordan Valley. Putting a settler with giving him a cattle, started to graze in the Palestinian areas, in their fields. So many attention created around there. And more than 23 outposts last year have been created like this in the middle of the Palestinian communities in that area. The other things is the settlers' attacks in the villages. For today, yesterday it was confrontations several places, either on the main roads or even attacking villages like Jalut yesterday, village in south of Nablus, where it's almost, there was just like has been protected from a disaster in the last minute. They want to burn the whole village. So confrontation there. Of course, all this attacks is backed by the soldiers. It's not the settlers, not alone in this. The other disaster also is that we are living internally is the election that we were hoping that we can change this corrupted system that we have, but at the last minute, Mahmoud Abbas just 2 days ago, being postponed, which is creating a lot of attention and tension in the West Bank. There was demonstrations in some cities, and there is like so many things going on around this. So when you look at the situation, I would say that we were living in one of the most critical situations internally and in confrontation with the colonizer. Talking about solidarity with our people and with the struggle, our struggle is very, very important for our steadfastness, for our continuation of that. And then this solidarity around the world, there was like examples and places, peoples that mark a very, very close solidarity and relation and connection with the Palestinian people, like South African, like particularly the Irish. When we talk about the Irish solidarity is not something that came recently or being created or born in a particular occasion. Rather than it is a long history, goes back to the beginning of last century, since 1916. Particularly, both of our people were struggling against the British colonization to our country. And likewise, what has been described by Colleen, that disasters and nakbas and catastrophes of the Palestinians has been created during the British colonization. And after that, in 1948, backed by the British, the Zionist movement and gangs that did one of the biggest catastrophes in the 20th century of expelling almost 2/3 of our people in 1948 that created on their ruins Israel at that time. So there is like a kind of a joint history of struggle. There is inspiration and emotional connections between both of our people. Then contacts directly, mainly if you want to talk just a little bit about some examples between IRA and PLO started in late 60s, and it has been strengthened in 70s, which has been developed training IRA volunteers, coordination and solidarity between them in so many actions and accidents that was happening that time. In 1918, it's remarkable also for me personally. I was a fresh student at BZ University that time. And I remember that we had like a big demonstration in the university, too many speeches and pictures about what happened in Ireland, where that time we were in solidarity with the Irish prisoners after the death of the Bobby Sandys, after 60 days of the hunger strike that they have, and where there were also 9 of his comrades the same year died after that. At the same time, from the prisons in Palestinian prisons, in the prisons had been smuggled the letters of support, particularly from Nafha prison, which is the biggest. It is in the Negev, in the desert. The biggest for the Palestinian prisoner. They smuggled also a solidarity letter to the families of the 10 men who died, and it has been read that time at the rally in Belfast. The same thing in 2012 when we have our Palestinian prisoners' big strikes was comprehensive in all over the jails inside the Israeli occupation state. When that time, if you remember, Khadr Adnan and Hana Shalabi was in a very long strike. So several families of the 10 men who died and many people also in Ireland, former hunger strikers as well, send several messages of support for the Palestinian prisoners and for the families of the strikers that time. So this was all the time the Palestinian people is looking for this very interesting solidarity in difficult times that we have. So remember how much this solidarity letters is very important also for the families of the people here. Needless to say, and I can't even in this few minutes can continue the solidarity movement actions that it has been going and still going on in Ireland. The Irish solidarity, it was in the forefront of supporting the BDS campaign. Even before we launching the 2005 call, which we were started talking about this in 2003 about the BDS. In 2004, it has been submitted a petition to the government signed by 12,000 people and also 52 members of the parliamentarians, members of the EU Parliament as well, and independent politicians that was calling for boycott Israel. We still remembering very well the Palestinian big flags raising on the Dublin municipality building the occasional anniversary of for the Palestinian Nakba, raising it on the summit of the famous Black Mountain as well in Belfast. The actions that go, solidarity of actions that goes on the universities and in several cities of Ireland. Besides also all the time, there was like, whenever there's something happened in Palestine, the Irish go to the street demonstrating in support of the Palestinian people. Also in the parliament, the Irish parliament is one of the very few parliaments that Palestinian case has been very strongly presented there in different opens. And I remember in the readings on Gaza and the wars on Gaza, Israel was and committing massacres in Gaza, there was a huge anger there, and it has been calling for even sanctions, and it touches even the political relation and the diplomatic relation with Israel. Where also in the parliament has been voted also a large majority with the boycotting in favor of the bill boycott of Israeli settlements products. Recently this year, like we talk about 1,000 Irish artists that pledged to boycott Israel in support of Palestine. So it's endless, like this solidarity action and movement, and all the time we are looking, whenever anything happened here in Palestine, we're looking for this support that comes from you, from Ireland, from many other people in the world. And really very excited about this initiative when we talk about United Airlines. It's really very, very interesting and means a lot for our people. And just remind me of what happened in South Africa when the apartheid regime has been collapsed, how much it is for the Palestinian people. And I think also United Ireland will be a victory for not just for us as the Palestinians, but as well for all people who are struggling for their rights around the world. Like this is victories against imperialism. That's really very important to advance and to support our struggle as a people for justice and for freedom. Trade unions in Ireland, we are looking really for your support to continue to the struggle of our people, and particularly the Palestinian workers' struggle. And here we are really hopefully that you mainly start like support in Ireland, but as well within the trade unions around the world, support the progressive trade unions that their voice has been blocked and banned in the big trade unions like ILO. Also, just to push this up, this grassroots initiatives, it's very important, not just for our struggle occupation, but internally in our situation that we are living in, and especially when we talk about struggling for rights. Unfortunately, that we start after Oslo, after we had this corrupted regime and all the splitting that we have between Gaza and West Bank, it has been used badly against the people and to confiscate their rights. I think this is very quick overview. And really, I wish that this initiative will see soon we'll see the light, and we will celebrate together, United Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamal. And I think it's it's beyond interesting, and it kind of reminds us of the benefit, such as it is, that we have in the Good Friday Agreement, that there is a path forward for us, a democratic and peaceful path. And I think it's sobering to listen to your testimony about, I suppose, the other side of the equation, where people don't have that possibility. So I'd like to thank you in particular for giving your personal testimony of what's going on in Palestine. Our final speaker of the evening is Larry Flanagan. He is the General Secretary of the Educational Institute Scotland, the EIS, which is Scotland's largest teaching union with 55,000 members. He spent 33 years as a frontline teacher in the classroom, has a long association with the EIS as an activist, a school representative, as a local officer, a council executive member and convener of the EIS Educational Committee. Beyond that, he is also a member of both the Scottish Trade Union Congress Council and the Council of the TUC in London. And as if he hasn't got enough to do, he's currently president of the European Trade Union Committee for Education, the ETUCE, which has affiliates in 51 countries, representing a total of 11 million members. How's that for a day's work? As Scotland goes to the polls this Thursday, I suppose there's an immediacy about its inclusion here. And Larry will hopefully talk about how the trade union movements in Scotland approached the first referendum, independence referendum in 2014, and how they might approach a possible IndyRef 2, with an eye to any lessons that the Irish trade union and labour movement might learn from our Scottish colleagues. So over to you, Larry.
Thanks very much, Mick, and greetings, colleagues from Glasgow. Or as I once heard Tommy Tiernan refer to it, Belfast Light. We have some sense of the issues that you're facing in Ireland. I do need to say, just at the outset, that the EIS doesn't actually have a policy position on the United Ireland. It's not an area that's been discussed. So I'm going to concentrate my contribution on the areas that Mick referred to, our experience in terms of the Scottish independence referendum, and in particular how the trade union movement approached that. And I will reference both the Scottish trade union movement and the British trade union movement, because there is an interesting contrast in terms of the approach that was taken. Scottish politics over the past period, the last decade or so, has been a binary process, essentially, with the dividing line being whether you were a yes supporter for Scottish independence or whether you were a pro-union supporter in terms of retention of the UK. In 1999, when the Scottish Parliament was re-established and we had the devolution settlement, the EIS, along with all trade unions, actually was unanimous in its support for that, because it was very clear at that point that it was, and it was referenced as such, the settled will of the Scottish people that there should be a parliament. So there was very limited opposition. The Tories essentially were the only opposition party. And the Scottish Parliament was designed on a transferable vote system to ensure that no single party could gain a majority of the seats. So unlike the first past the post system, which applies in UK elections, there is an additional member system which is supposed to balance out proportionately the voting. And initially it was the Labour Party and the Lib Dems who formed a coalition. Labour had also the minority government. But we then saw a growth in support for the Scottish National Party and a significant growth in support for the Yes campaign, the Yes side of the debate. The two main parties being the Scottish Nationalist Party, but also the Greens, who are a pro-independence party. And from a position where independence hovered around 20 to 25% of the electorate, there was a majority yes position voted into the Scottish Parliament. In fact, the SNP have been in power now for 14 years and are almost certainly going to be in power after Thursday when the elections take place. The Labour Party, despite once being the dominant party in Scotland, it has been reduced in 2 UK elections to 1 MP from Scotland. And it's currently the third party in the Scottish Parliament. The Tories are actually the official opposition. So that's been a significant change in the party fortunes, and it reflects the political debate within the country. So the referendum in 2014 produced a 55-45 no vote, and therefore independence didn't happen. The current polls suggest broadly 50-50. The last 10 dozen or so polls have had the Yes campaign ahead, but it slips back from time to time. It's quite interesting to look at the UK dynamic. So when Corbyn was the leader of the British Labour Party, there was a little bit of support for Scottish Labour, but in actual fact, many of the Labour voters who had switched from Labour to the SNP simply stayed with the SNP, even with the prospect of a left Labour government. And I make that point because it's actually very important in terms of trade unionists and the position that the trade union movement has taken. In the 2014 referendum, the Scottish Trade Union Congress, like the EIS, adopted a position of party political neutrality. So we didn't take a position for or against independence, and most of the trade unions adopted the same. But our position was focused around raising the question about post the referendum, irrespective of the result, what was the kind of Scotland that people wanted to live in? So it was questions around social justice, addressing the impact of poverty around workers' rights and the economy. And that was actually a very important decision by the STUC, because although the EIS as a body has always been non-party political, and we're not affiliated, the STUC has traditionally been seen as Labour supporting. The four biggest unions are the EIS, Unite, Unison and GMB, and with the exception of ourselves, those three other unions are all major Labour affiliates, and at a UK level exercise significant influence on the British Labour Party. But in Scotland, all of those unions eventually supported the more neutral position of the STUC, and that came about because of the pressure they were getting from within their own ranks. So within Unite, for example, there was a significant campaign to remove individuals removing themselves from the political levy, which was used to affiliate to the Labour Party, to the point where Unite had to publicly acknowledge that it wasn't going to take a position for or against independence, and it would be left to the Scottish people to decide. And a big part of that was around public sector trade unions and the role of women trade unionists in particular. And I think that's an important lesson to be learned, that in terms of looking at the issues, a very pragmatic and practical focus is what the trade unions tend to be looking for. What are the benefits to the people we represent and what is on offer? I have to say that, and I see Austin's posting from within in the chat there around the British TUC. I haven't found the TUC General Council to be a particularly sympathetic place to the idea of Scottish self-determination. And at one point in a debate around the devolvement of employment law to the Scottish Parliament, which we had been arguing for as a union, because it would have afforded protection from, for example, the Tories' anti-trade union laws. There was a resistance to the idea that Scotland should have different employment law legislation to the rest of the UK. And at one point I was told by a senior figure in one of the unions I just referenced that she was sorry, but in their rule book, Scotland was a region. And she was totally oblivious to why I would be offended by that remark, because no one in Scotland would consider themselves to be a region of the UK. There's been some progress on it. The language used now at the TUC is the regions and the four nations. I'm sure some of you would have an objection to the arithmetic around that definition, but there is at least an acknowledgement that there is a different political dynamic in play in Scotland, which has to be factored in to the thinking of trade unionists. I think I think we made a good decision to focus on the issues of social justice and to use a referendum to try and mobilise opinion around not just the constitutional debate, but the nature of the society in which we wanted to live. And that's currently the debate that's going on at the moment. So there will almost certainly be a pro-yes majority in the Scottish Parliament after Thursday. There is then a democratic challenge around whether a second referendum will be allowed, with the UK government very firmly saying it doesn't matter what the Scottish people decide, and the UK government will not allow a second referendum. And it actually shows you how politically inept the UK Tories are. because that very statement is a recruitment sergeant for the Yes campaign, telling people that no matter how they vote, they'll be told how to behave, and there won't be a second referendum. But even if there is a second referendum, you know, with the current polls, you couldn't say that an independent Scotland is a settled will of the Scottish people, because there, you know, there's clearly a significant division, and the Scottish Tories have reinvigorated themselves from a deflated party by becoming defenders of the Union and seeking to attract votes on that basis. Labour is still alternating between wanting to appear progressive, but also wanting to defend the Union. And we are going to be left with, you know, an outcome in the balance again. So the question then becomes, well, what tips the scale in terms of that decision-making process? And it comes back, I think, to the issues that I referenced in the last referendum. There are people in Scotland whose position on independence is defined by nationalism of one sort or another, so Scottish nationalism or British nationalism. You know, that identity for some people is all that defines their voting intent. But for the vast majority, particularly for trade unionists and for workers, there's a much more pragmatic question, which is, what kind of society will I live in? And a lot of the yes support has come from a rejection of a Tory-led Britain and the consequences of that over the past period, and an absence of hope that Labour can challenge that. But there still remains a significant question around how people would move in their voting, because I don't think anyone's going to be persuaded by the issue of geography in terms of Scottish independence. I think they'll be persuaded by the nature of the country in which they will live if there's constitutional change. And I was interested when Mick said earlier, will a new Ireland create change? United Ireland create the change that trade unionists should be looking for? But I think you could pose that question the other way as well, because potentially a United Ireland only comes about when people actually see that change. They see the benefit of the change. And I think building a campaign for constitutional change around social issues is a prerequisite of winning the constitutional change, because otherwise people will retreat into their current identities. And as a trade unionist, you know, and I can see Jerry Murphy there at the bottom of my screen puffing away. You wouldn't be allowed to do that in a live meeting, Jerry. You'd be outside the room for your roll-ups, mate. But as a trade unionist, I think we need to take very pragmatic approaches. On a day-to-day basis, we're all negotiators. We all have to resolve difficult situations. And as Mick referenced, I am now president of ATUS, the European Confederation. I met with a group of affiliates from Eastern Europe earlier in the week. And on the call were trade unionists from two countries who are currently at war with one another. Right, but they were in the room in the meeting. And one of them referenced their presence as ambassadors of peace. And I thought that was very interesting, because essentially, given some of the challenges that we face and the potential divisions, then if trade unionists can't create a platform for unity, then no one else is going to, because the strongest foundation, I think, still remains that class identity, the politics of trade unionism and solidarity. And I think the lesson that we've learned in Scotland is that people are, you know, well, a lot of our members are most interested in what progresses social justice, what creates a better society, what addresses the poverty that too many of our children are currently living in. And I think that's the framework that we have to, you know, those are the questions we have to ask around any constitutional arrangement, because those are the answers to those questions are what I think actually moves people on in their thinking, and gets them out of their camps or their silos, and gets them enthusiastic about change and something different. So I'll leave it there. I did actually time myself, but I forgot to push the button. So I hope that was not too long.
Thanks, Ray. We'll go easy on you, Larry. As they say here, you're a neighbour's child. We'll let you away with it. No, listen, that was an excellent, and I noticed one of the two remarks coming up there. It was an excellent survey of the current Scottish situation, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Well, not just throughout, but at the end, pointing out the core issue of social justice as being the driver and the platform to any constitutional change, to get the buy-in from ordinary people, ordinary working people. That concludes our formal speakers for the evening, and I have a number of questions which have been forwarded to me. I'm going to take them in the order that I have them. So if there's a disjoint between the subjects covered, please forgive me. The first question is probably directed at Colleen and Claire, and it's: would you support the right of Irish citizens abroad in the United States and Canada to have the right to vote in the future border poll for Irish unity?
I mean, that's yes. I guess I don't know the rules in Irish elections, how that usually works. You know, in the United States, citizens abroad can vote in elections, so that wouldn't be an odd thing to me at all. So I would say yes.
Well, the question obviously has to be underpinned by that it's legally permissible. But I suppose simply, if you just take the question that is, what about yourself, Claire?
I also agree. It would be a really good thing, yeah, if people here could, because there's so many people here that have very strong ties there, and I think it would be really helpful. Yeah. I don't think it's without problems, but I would be in favor of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are legal difficulties around it, and there may even be political difficulties around it. I suppose, in fairness, the question could also be directed to Larry, because there are people living in Scotland for whom the same situation would arise, but maybe not quite as accentuated. It's obviously something that may arise in the future. I have no doubt that as the debate develops, that it will be one of those issues. The next question up is it?
Nick,
sorry, I beg your pardon?
Could I just, it's Larry, could I just make a very small
sorry,
point
Larry, I
on
beg your
that?
pardon.
Yeah, no, it's just because the question did arise in the Scottish referendum, and you couldn't vote. Anyone who lived in Scotland was entitled to vote, but Scots living outside of Scotland, you know, even in England and Wales, weren't allowed to vote. Right. Yeah. I actually disagree slightly with my two colleagues, because I'm an Irish citizen. Both my parents are Irish. I've got my Irish passport, but I would not think it appropriate for me to take part in a referendum on the future of Ireland, which I think is rightly to, you know, the people who are living in that country. So I think it'd also be potentially a huge tripwire in terms of how it would be perceived, because Ireland's future could be decided by people living outside of Ireland, because there are millions of citizens outside Ireland.
That's the point I think I was trying to make, that it wouldn't. There's not just a legal aspect to it. There's a political aspect to it, and I also note there was a note in the chat line there from Austin making obviously the same point as yourselves, is that there are lots of Irish people living in England. But again, that's something that we need to keep an eye out to. The next question is, what would a shared island look like, or shared Ireland look like, with all the different unions? I presume the person who posed that question means trade unions, and I'm not quite sure what it means, but I guess it would be, it may raise the question of maybe union amalgamation, or I don't know whether there are spheres of influence. So I don't know if anybody might have a general view on that one. Feel free to comment, even if you don't live here. Okay, we'll move on. The next question up, the third question up, is what actions can international unions take to support Irish unity? Now, I know that some of that has been covered already by Colleen and also by Claire, but I don't know if Florian or Larry might have a view.
I think the key thing is that they have to be informed, and they have to be informed by Irish trade unions. Mm-hmm. So I think that part of the solidarity role of international trade unions is not to supplant the efforts of trade unions, but to support them. So I think the lead always has to come, and the asks have to come from the trade unions in the country involved. And I think it's to the Irish trade unions movement credit and to its strength that ICTU is an all-Ireland approach. So even where you have British-based trade unions involved in parts of Ireland, ICTU is still the all-Ireland trade union body. So I'll be waiting for Jerry to send me an email telling me what he wants me to do in terms of solidarity, and I think that's appropriate. But I do think international solidarity from trade unions is hugely important in terms of breaking down isolation, and where you have people who are worried, then I think seeing an international context is reassuring, or it should be reassuring. To see that there is a kind of global support for the kind of future being discussed.
Thank you very much, Larry. Does anybody else want to come in on that question? Any of the other speakers? Okay, well, we'll move on to the final question that I part of it is directed towards Florian well, more Florian's presentation. And the question goes as follows. Florian mentioned that what should have happened in Germany in relation to the best practices of West Germany and East Germany to be combined to make a better new country. And clearly from what Florian has said, that didn't happen. What do panelists see as the best parts of the 26 counties and the 6 counties that can be combined to make a better united Ireland? Now, obviously that implies that you know something about it, but insofar as you do, could I pose that to each panelist in the order that they spoke? Florian, would you like to deal with that question?
I think the question was
briefly
to the other panelists, because I already mentioned my view.
Okay, that's fine. And okay,
to the other panelists, I think the question goes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, does anybody want to come in on that? The question: what do panelists see as the best parts of the current states, the 26 and 6 counties, that can be combined to make a better united Ireland? Otherwise, I imagine what are the elements that could be, if you like, harmonised or brought together to make a better united Ireland, along the lines, I think, what Larry and others were talking about in terms of that kind of thrust and thirst for social justice and the bread and butter things that matter on a day-to-day basis for ordinary workers in the communities.
Claire has a hand up there.
Claire, okay, sorry, Claire.
Yeah, I haven't.
My apologies. You're here.
I haven't thought this through very much, and I would think that people in Ireland would have a better notion of this. But one thing that jumps out to me is the difference in the political structure between the North and the South. And so if I was going to want to have something positive from the North, it would be the DeHunt system, or, you know, at least some kind of guarantee of equal sort of representation across parties. Not that it works that well up in the North, but I still think that the system itself is well thought out.
Okay, anybody else? Colleen?
Yeah,
No?
I mean, I think the trade unions would be able to articulate this much more straightforwardly. But healthcare would be one issue.
Of course.
I think North and South, improvement in education, a more equitable approach to education would be a strong pitch in relation to the benefits of a united Ireland, a new Ireland. And some of the, and there are elements even within the experience of the European Union. There are elements, some of the support in the North, unlikely support in the North for remaining in Europe, was largely focused around some of the economic benefits. So, there has to be progressive roots there around the economy. And I think I saw in the chat earlier, one of the things that both parts of Ireland could benefit from is more equitable trade union legislation that actually enshrine workers' rights more effectively. But that's not really combining the best of both. That's doing away with the worst of both and putting something decent in its place.
Okay, I think on that note, I think we'll bring the discussion to the end, to an end. First of all, I would like to thank all our speakers this evening for what has been a very wide-ranging, stimulating, and interesting hour. And that's if you like, those are words are written down on paper. But I think just to go back to something that Larry said, I think it's the international dimension provides, if you like, a stimulus and a dynamic to not just thought processes, but the way in which we approach this. It gives us a certain perspective and also a certain validation that the work that we're about is absolutely on the right track. And so in that context, I want to thank, first of all, Florian Wilder from Germany, Colleen Boyle from the LIUNA, Claire DeLille from the Canadian Postal Workers Union, from Jamal Juma from Palestine, and last but not least, our good friend, Larry Flanagan. I'd also like to thank all of the people who have taken the time to tune in and join us at the fag end of a May Day weekend. And I know it's wet outside and it's probably nicer inside, but we very much appreciate your presence. There is, as they say, no show without punch. And we hope that you'll do so in future such events that we arrange. Tonight couldn't have happened without support behind the scenes, and I would like particularly to thank Rachel, Rory, and the steering committee. While I'm looking through the attendees, I'd also like to give a big shout out to our very good friends in County Meath, the Jim Connell Society, who keep not only the song of the Labour anthem flying, but also the red flag. In fact, in Crossakeel in County Meath is the only place on this island, perhaps in these islands, where the red flag flies every day. And I want to wish you all a good evening. Enjoy, as I say, the remaining hours of May Day weekend and keep in touch. And just back to Scotland. The reason, by the way, I haven't declared interest, 2/3 of my family currently live in Scotland and will be voting, hopefully, or I want to know why, on Thursday. And as they say in Scotland, haste ye back. And as we say here, slán. And remember to be careful out there. It's the COVID threat is not over yet. And on that point, I'd also like to remember not just those who were ill in hospital with COVID, but all the frontline workers, wherever they be, whether they be full-time, part-time, or volunteer, to keep us all safe, keep us supplied, and give us hope for the future. And with that, I'd like to wish everybody good night and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.